So when exiting the UK tax system and becoming a non-UK tax resident, a key milestone is to go and actually notify the HMRC that you have left the UK and you have become a non-tax resident. And in this video, we are going to discuss the key requirements and the process of how to go about doing that. Today, I'm joined by Laura Sen of LSR Partners to discuss this in detail. So Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shiraz.
The topic is on how to notify the HMRC that you have become a non-resident or non-tax resident. So can you start with advising if there are any legal requirements on how to do that, or if there are any consequences, and then we can get into like the process of actually doing it.
No worries. So HMRC do state that if you are leaving the UK to move outside, and it is to go to live outside of the UK, not just because you're going on holiday, but that you are supposed to notify them. I mean, basically, if you don't notify them, then whilst there's no penalties as such, it could cause quite the administrative burden because HMRC will think that you're still living in the UK. If you start to receive income from outside of the UK, they're likely to be notified by tax authorities in the country in which you're living that you've received that income, and they are likely to think that you are avoiding or evading paying taxes, which, as I say, can lead to enquiries and then looking into your situation in a lot more depth.
Okay, and can you also advise like what is the actual process? Like if someone has already left UK, do they have to notify at the time of leaving, or once they have left it permanently? What's the process? What are the documentations or form requirements and the timelines that are associated with this process?
No worries. So there's three things that I can think of that you may need to be doing when you leave the UK. There's If we consider kind of the wider tax area, there's possibly a few more than that. The first thing that you want to be doing is to notify HMRC that you're leaving the UK, and that can be done in one of two ways. So the first way to do that, and this would be an option for you if you're not within the self-assessment tax return system, that would be to submit something called a Form P85 to HMRC. Now, Form P85 is a form that can be done either online through a government gateway account as an individual, or alternatively, if you need some support with it, it can be prepared, kind of completed online, printed, signed, and physically sent off to HMRC. So if you need a tax advisor to support you with the completion of that, there's an alternative option. HMRC effectively ask you a series of questions to identify whether you will in fact be breaking UK tax residence. Now, if you will be breaking UK tax residence and you're not within the self-assessment system, the likelihood is that you are an employee. And if you're leaving the UK midway through the year as an employee, the likelihood is that you will have overpaid taxes for the year. The reason for that is because the kind of real-time payroll system works that you receive each month 1/12 of your personal allowance, 1/12 of your 20% tax bracket, 1/12 of your 40% tax bracket. So say, for example, you leave in month 5 of the tax year, you would only have received 5/12 of your personal allowance, if applicable, 5/12 of your 20% tax bracket, etc. And by submitting the P85, not only are you telling HMRC that you're breaking UK tax residence, but you're also asking them to reconcile your tax affairs. So they would effectively be able to issue you with any refund that is available to you. So that's kind of the first way of telling HMRC. However, if you are within the tax return system and if you would need to file a tax return anyway in the year that you leave the UK, if you submit a P85, they basically turn around and say, thank you very much for completing this. However, complete a tax return in order to reconcile your tax affairs. So the second way that you can tell HMRC that you're leaving the UK would be to complete a tax return. That has to wait until the end of the tax year. So you'd be looking at the 6th of April after you leave the UK onwards that you would be able to complete that return. You would not be able to, if you file your own return, you would not be able to use Government Gateway account to file your return in the year of departure. The reason for that is because you can't complete the residency pages through this Government Gateway account. So you would have three options for filing the return in the year of departure. The first would be that you can file a paper return to HMRC and effectively complete the paper SA 109 pages and send that to HMRC. Now, if you're sending a paper return, the deadline for that is the 31st of October rather than the 31st of January following the end of the tax year. Alternatively, you can file online, but you would need to use HMRC's approved software to do so. And the third way that you can get the return filed is to use an accountant. And obviously with split year treatment, it's not the most straightforward, so is probably something that you might need a bit of support with. So that's the way that you would generally notify HMRC that you are leaving the UK. There are a couple of other things that you may wish to think about as well when you leave the UK that kind of touches on UK taxes as well. The first is if you will be renting out your home or any other property in the UK whilst you are considered to be a UK tax non-resident. Now, if that is the case, you would become considered to be a non-resident landlord. And if you are a non-resident landlord, the starting point is that your letting agent, or alternatively your tenant, if you don't have a letting agent, should be withholding 20% tax at source and paying that over to HMRC on your behalf. If you register as a non-resident landlord with HMRC, they will allow that rental payment to be paid gross to you. But what it does mean is you need to be filing tax returns on an annual basis whilst you're receiving that rental income in order to reconcile your position. The second thing that we tend to see on tax returns, so I'm going to mention it, is if you're leaving the UK and breaking UK tax residence and you have an outstanding student loan, you need to get in touch with the student loans company and let them know that you're leaving the UK as well. They will usually arrange some sort of payment plan, and that will sit outside of the UK tax return system. And then the final thing that I can think of is to do with national insurance, which some people will find will sit within their tax return. So if you are breaking UK tax residence, then you can potentially keep your national insurance contributions up to date by making voluntary national insurance contributions whilst you are outside of the UK. And you potentially could look at making either class 2 or class 3 national insurance contributions whilst you're non-resident, subject to what you're doing whilst you're outside of the UK and what you've been doing before you left the UK.
So, Laura, my next question is that obviously I understand that to notify to the HMRC that you have become a UK non-tax resident is on a self-assessment basis. But what happens if the HMRC does not accept this assessment? Like, for example, if someone has a home, a primary home, a spouse and children still in the UK, is there a chances that the HMRC does not accept this assessment? And then comes the question that what are those basic requirements that one should make sure that they are fulfilled at the time of making this filing or notifying to the HMRC that they have become a non-tax resident, and then they come out successfully with the assessment of the HMRC also accepting that status?
Oh, no worries. So, I mean, in terms of the split year treatment, so you would tend to do your P85 at the point when you're leaving the UK. That's going to be based upon your intention and what your plan is in terms of leaving the UK. Similarly, when you come to do your tax return at the end of the year that your year has been split, you would be doing it before you've actually had your following year outside of the UK, which would be needed in order to apply that split year. So I suppose what you would be telling HMRC initially would be your intention. However, in terms of UK tax residence and the statutory residence test, the criteria is very black and white, and it is based upon your time spent in and out of the UK. I would recommend that anybody who is planning on leaving the UK and breaking UK tax residence, especially those who potentially have family members remaining in the UK, I would suggest that it would be prudent to or if not essential really, to be recording your travel to and from the UK, to also have an understanding of what the maximum number of days you can have in the UK is, and also, if there's any day limits in terms of work days, etc. You want to be making sure that you are recording that. Now, there are, I believe, various offerings, various softwares that are available to allow you to kind of track where you are. And I think the big thing is, from HMRC's perspective, obviously it's self-assessment. Keeping a bit of a track of where you're at is great. And if, say, for example, you spent less than 15 midnights in the UK during a tax year, you're probably going to be in a position where you can comfortably say, I'm non-resident because I physically haven't spent enough days in the UK. This is backed up by border control, and here's my travel to and from the UK. But if, for example, you were in the UK more frequently, you may want to not only back it up with travel documentation, but also evidence of, I was here, this is what I was doing. If you wanted to prove, for example, that you didn't have an accommodation tie, you might want to keep evidence of your hotel bookings or your Airbnb bookings to prove that you were staying somewhere else, and also pictures of yourself in there. It is one of those where, because of the system that HMRC operate, is self-assessment, it doesn't get looked into too often, but at the point when it does get looked into, it gets looked at in a lot of detail.
Thank you. And I think my next question would be that what are the consequences of failing to notify that you have become a non-resident or tax resident to the HMRC?
I think the biggest challenge, if you haven't notified HMRC that you are breaking UK tax residence, is potentially a massive administrative burden. We have seen instances, admittedly, where people have been filing tax returns, but they have been filing tax returns as a UK tax resident when they are in fact a UK tax non-resident, and HMRC have tried to tax them on income that effectively is overseas income and shouldn't be taxable on them. They then have to go through this administrative burden of challenging HMRC and actually evidencing why they consider themselves to be UK tax non-residents. Whereas if they had simply filed a tax return as a UK tax non-resident, it likely wouldn't have even arisen in the first instance.
Yeah, that makes sense. Instead of chasing the HMRC in order to prove that the taxation that they're putting is actually for the non-residency status, if you do it from the beginning, then you save yourself all of that administrative efforts.
Exactly. And I think as well, if you, for example, if you are filing a tax return in the year that you are leaving the UK, and after that you won't actually have any UK sources of income. So some people do still need to file tax returns, especially if they are non-resident landlords, but other people do not need to file UK tax returns once they have left the UK. Unfortunately, HMRC's software isn't hot enough to pick up if you've split the year, that you're then and got no other sources of income, that you won't need to file for the following year. So the likelihood is that HMRC will continue to issue you with filing requirements until you tell them stop. So even though you don't file a P85, you file a tax return, the likelihood is you'll still need to tell HMRC, okay, I filed my last tax return, I don't need to file any more. And once again, we do get quite a few people who will get in touch with us to say, oh, I'm in a bit of a pickle because HMRC have applied thousands of pounds worth of penalties because they think I should have filed tax returns for the past 2 to 3 years. And once a date's gone past, we actually have to file a tax return in order to appeal those penalties. So once again, you're just adding costs to your own, you're just adding unnecessary costs to your position, or to kind of get it reconciled if you don't reconcile it on a real-time basis.
What do you think would be some potential tips or practical steps one can take to ensure that there is a smooth transition out of the UK and then notifying to the HMRC and making sure everything goes as per the timelines and as per the plan?
Realistically, I would be suggesting that you speak to somebody in terms of both the UK tax side of things and also the tax position or tax advisor in the country in which you're relocating to. This would be to understand whether you have any sort of future filing obligations whilst you're a UK tax non-resident, whether it might be possible to resolve it by a P85 rather than a tax return in the year of your relocation, and just to feel comfortable that you've got your position right. From HMRC's perspective, now the arena of expat tax and kind of that global mobility side of things is not straightforward. But from HMRC's perspective, their starting point is that you need to have taken reasonable care to get your tax position right. And with the situation being complicated, we have had a number of instances where people have, HMRC have gone back to the individuals who've gotten themselves into a pickle and said, why did you not speak to a tax advisor at the time? Did you take sufficient reasonable care to get your tax affairs right?
That makes totally sense, Laura. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So I think that's it for today. And if any of the viewers who are looking to exit the UK tax system, moving overseas, they're planning to move to Dubai for setting up a company, residency, banking, or maybe moving the family, you can get in touch with myself or with Laura. The links would be in the description below. That's it for today, and we will see you in the next video.